They smiled at me like I belonged here, under the crystal chandeliers of my husband's family estate. I almost believed it, until the microphone in my hand went silent. Across the room, Sarah's voice slid like a blade. Her company is a facade. All her deals are fake. Laughter rippled, low and poisonous. I didn't flinch. Let them think I was cornered. Behind the scenes, a signal had already been sent. In minutes, the truth would pour across the room in high definition. Sarah thought she was burying me. She had no idea she'd just built my stage. The air inside the mansion shimmered with the scent of roses and expensive perfume. Crystal chandeliers cast golden halos over polished marble floors. Every guest seemed to glide rather than walk, crystal glasses in hand, their laughter blending into a soft, cultured hum. My husband's hand rested lightly on my back as we stepped into the main hall, the perfect couple for the perfect night. I knew my dress, my smile, and my posture were all exactly what they wanted to see. For the first few minutes, I let myself believe in it, the illusion of belonging, of being one of them. Then came my cue. A waiter handed me the microphone and the crowd shifted, their attention narrowing to me. I had rehearsed my speech, every word meant to honor the company's legacy and hint at the new chapter we were writing together. But the second I lifted the microphone to my lips, the sound cut out. A hollow silence filled the space, sharper than any jeer. I tapped the mic once, twice. Nothing. Across the room, I caught Sarah's reflection in the mirrored wall. Her lips curled in satisfaction as she leaned toward a cluster of guests. Her words were too quiet for most to hear, but the venom carried straight to me. Her company is just a facade. Her husband pays for everything. The ripple was immediate. I saw the way eyes shifted, some sympathetic, others gleeful. One man in a navy suit tilted his head toward his wife and murmured, "I heard she's never signed a real contract in her life." The words reached me like a cold finger tracing my spine. I forced a polite smile, lowering the dead microphone, pretending to adjust my earring as I scanned the crowd. This wasn't a slip of the tongue from a jealous sister-in-law. This was coordinated. I recognized the rhythm of it, how the whispers started in one corner, then migrated, like a rumor with legs. I drifted toward the buffet table, picking up a champagne flute I had no intention of drinking. My phone, hidden in my clutch, buzzed once. A text from a colleague in the media industry flashed across the screen. "She's showing people a file with your company logo. Claims it's proof you outsource all your work." I didn't need to see it to know it was Sarah's doing. She'd always been fascinated by the anti-counterfeit trend in branding, and now she was using it as her weapon. A fake dossier, documents doctored to look like they came from my office, stripped of context and painted as evidence that I wasn't the mind behind my own empire. Clever enough to be believable to anyone who wanted to believe it. She was talking to my father-in-law now, her hand on his arm in that practiced way of hers, like she was confiding out of concern. His jaw tightened as she spoke. I knew he was already predisposed to doubt me. Sarah had been chipping away at that trust since the day I married his son. I let my gaze sweep the room, tracking the flow of conversation, the shifting alliances. Years of running a media company had trained me to read a crowd like an open book. The narrative was being written in real time, and I was the villain of Sarah's story. I exhaled slowly, feeling my pulse steady. This was not the time to defend myself, not directly. Defensiveness would smell like guilt. I needed the reversal to be surgical, timed so perfectly it felt inevitable. My fingers moved under the table, unlocking my phone and typing a single message to someone I trusted more than anyone in this room. "Bring it now, set it in the main hall." I hit send without a second thought. From across the space, Sarah caught my eye. She mistook my calm for defeat. Her smile was almost pitying, as if she were already savoring the moment she thought she had won. I let her think it. Around us, the anniversary celebration went on. Laughter, speeches, the clinking of cutlery. But there was an undercurrent now, a taut wire humming beneath the music. Guests were watching me out of the corners of their eyes, curious to see if I would crumble or claw my way back. I adjusted the strap of my clutch and moved toward the staircase that overlooked the hall. From here, I could see everything. The chandelier's reflection in the polished floor, the servers weaving between tables, and Sarah radiant with false virtue, holding court among my in-laws. In less than 10 minutes, the tide would turn. I could almost hear it already. The sharp intake of breath, the stunned silence before the applause, the way eyes would swing from her to me in disbelief. For now, I simply smiled, the picture of graciousness, while my stage was being built in the shadows. I let my shoulders slump just enough for the performance to feel authentic. The trick to playing the victim was in the details, how your gaze falls to the floor a heartbeat too long, how you avoid eye contact just enough for people to believe you're shrinking. The crowd saw what they wanted to see, a woman out of her depth, silenced by the weight of accusation. It was easier to let them think I was losing than to try and convince them otherwise. While I circled the room, nibbling at hors d'oeuvres I couldn't taste, I cataloged everything. Which aunts patted Sarah's arm approvingly, which cousins leaned in, hanging on her every word, who glanced my way and quickly looked away, afraid their sympathy might be noticed. The alliances were forming exactly where I expected them to. Family ties had a way of distorting judgment. By the dessert table, Sarah's phone was angled toward me, a soft click, then another. She didn't bother hiding it. Within seconds, I felt the buzz of my own phone. Someone had forwarded me a screenshot from the family group chat. There I was, looking down, my expression unreadable, under Sarah's caption. Now everyone can see the truth. I tucked my phone away and sipped champagne as if I hadn't just been branded a fraud to every blood relative in the room. Let her build her narrative. Mine was about to eclipse it. The first hint of change came in the form of a ripple of motion at the far end of the hall. A man in a dark suit threaded through the guests, not part of the family but impossible to mistake. James Linton, a familiar face to anyone with a television. He was one of the most recognizable anchors on national news and also an old friend from my early days in media. Sarah's eyes followed him, confusion tugging at her composure. James didn't acknowledge her. Instead, he strode straight to me, clasped my hand warmly, and murmured, "It's all set." In his other hand, he held a small black transmitter. A low hum filled the room as the main projector on the wall flickered to life. Conversations faltered, chairs scraped against the marble floor as heads turned toward the sudden glow. The image came into focus, me, seated under studio lights, mid-interview. A bold caption stretched across the bottom, Rachel Carter, CEO of Carter Media Group, on landmark acquisition deal. The Chiron scrolled details about a multi-million-dollar expansion that had just been signed. My voice filled the hall, calm and confident, discussing market strategy and long-term growth. Gasps erupted. Someone near the front muttered, "That's live." Another whispered, "She's on air right now?" The realization sank in. This wasn't a pre-recorded puff piece. This was happening in real time, my interview broadcasting nationwide, piped directly into the heart of the family estate. On screen, I laughed easily with James's co-anchor, explaining how the deal would double our workforce and solidify our place in the industry. Numbers appeared beside my name, figures that no rumor could dismantle. The applause from the studio audience bled into the hall, merging with the stunned silence here. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw two of Sarah's allies exchange uneasy glances before quietly slipping away from her table. Others followed, drawn toward me now that the air had shifted. The same people who had looked at me with pity minutes ago were suddenly recalibrating, deciding where their loyalty might best serve them. Sarah's face tightened. Her fingers drummed against the table, nails clicking in a staccato beat. I could almost hear her thoughts scrambling for a counterattack. Her mouth moved, something to my father-in-law, but his eyes were fixed on the screen, absorbing every polished word I spoke. The interview wrapped with a firm handshake between me and the anchor, my smile steady as the camera faded out. The lights in the hall brightened, and for a moment the silence was absolute. Then the murmurs began, soft at first, then louder. Congratulations, admiration, even the occasional apology disguised as a compliment. I accepted them with the same gracious mask I'd worn all night, though now it carried the weight of vindication. Movement near the doorway caught my attention. Sarah was slipping from her chair, clutching her bag, her posture stiff. She moved quickly, weaving between guests with the single-minded focus of someone fleeing a scene they no longer controlled. I set down my glass and stepped forward, intercepting her just as her hand reached the brass handle of the double doors. "Leaving so soon?" My voice was low but carried in the hush that followed. Her jaw tightened. "I have nothing else to say." I smiled, the kind that was all teeth and no warmth. "Good, because I'm just getting started." I didn't let Sarah slip away. My hand rested lightly on the door beside hers, not blocking her path, but making it clear she'd have to go through me to leave. "Actually," I said, my tone warm enough to pass for civility, "why don't we settle this right now? Everyone's here, and I'm sure they'd love to hear your side of the story." Her eyes darted toward the hall. Guests were watching, some leaning forward like they'd been waiting for the next act. Sarah's instinct was to run, but the social weight of so many eyes held her in place. With a stiff smile, she followed me back to the center of the room. The projector was still up, the last frame of my televised interview frozen on the screen. I gestured toward it. "Sarah, since you've made such serious claims about my company tonight, perhaps you'd like to explain to everyone why you believe this is all fake." She folded her arms, her chin lifting. "Because I know the truth. You didn't build Carter Media, you just put your name on it. You hire people to make deals, then you take the credit." I let the silence hang, then tilted my head. "Interesting. You must know a lot about my hiring process, then. In fact," I took a step closer, lowering my voice so only she and the nearest guests could hear. "Remind me, didn't you once apply for a position there?" Her eyes flashed. "That was years ago." "Yes," I said, keeping my tone even, "and you weren't selected. Not because you weren't family, because you weren't qualified for the role. And perhaps that's been difficult to accept." A ripple moved through the room. The implication was clear. This wasn't about truth, it was about resentment. Sarah's composure wavered. She opened her mouth, then closed it. And that single hesitation was all it took for someone in the crowd to lift their phone and start recording. I could hear the faint click of camera shutters, the hum of whispered commentary. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a younger cousin smirking as he typed. Minutes later, the notification buzzed on my phone. "Family betrayal is trending." The clip was already circulating, Sarah admitting she'd been turned down, the crowd's reaction, my measured response. Her face tightened. "You're twisting this." I shrugged. "I'm just telling the story as it happened." Before she could answer, I reached into my clutch and pulled out a small device, a portable speaker already cued to play a file. "While we're on the subject of truth," I said, my voice carrying across the hall, "I think everyone deserves to hear this." A click, and the recording began. Sarah's voice filled the air, unmistakable. "It's just a loan, Dad. The investment is solid. I'll pay it back in 3 months." The recording shifted, the tone growing more desperate. "I know the company fund is for emergencies, but this is my chance to prove myself." The room went still. My father-in-law's brow furrowed, my husband's eyes narrowed. The recording continued, detailing the amount, 6 figures taken from the family company's reserve, followed by the terse acknowledgement months later that the investment had collapsed. Sarah's face drained of color. "That's private," she hissed. "It was taken from the company's account," I said, "which makes it everyone's business." Movement caught my attention. My mother-in-law, usually Sarah's fiercest defender, stood from her seat. Without a word, she turned and walked toward the far exit, her expression unreadable. The silence after the recording was heavier than any accusation. It pressed in from all sides, the crowd waiting for someone to speak. Sarah broke first. Her voice rose, sharp and ragged. "You think this makes you better than me? You think one deal and a TV interview make you worthy? You are not one of us, Rachel. You will never be one of us." Her words cracked in the middle, but she didn't stop. "You married into this family for the name, the status. Without us, you're nothing." For a moment, I just looked at her. Not with anger, those days were gone, but with something closer to pity. "Without you," I said quietly, "I'm free." Her chest heaved. The room seemed to hold its breath. Whatever game Sarah thought she was playing had just slipped out of her hands, and everyone here knew it. The tension in the hall was brittle, like glass about to shatter. I could feel every gaze fixed on me, weighing the balance of power that had just shifted. I let the silence stretch, giving the moment its full gravity, before reaching into my clutch once more. "This evening was meant to celebrate the past," I said, my voice carrying without the need for a microphone, "but I think it's time we talk about the future." From the clutch, I drew out a sleek leather portfolio and placed it on the table nearest the projector. The soft click of the clasp echoed in the hush. I pulled out a set of crisp documents, their letterheads gleaming under the chandelier light. "Carter Media has finalized a joint venture that will double the value of Carter & Sons in the next 18 months. Gasps rippled through the room. My father-in-law's posture stiffened, his eyes darting between the contract and me. My husband took a step closer, scanning the pages as if needing to see the numbers himself. "This deal," I continued, "isn't just mine. It's ours. Carter & Sons will be a principal partner. Every success we achieve will strengthen the family legacy." I slid the final page across the table, a pen resting neatly on top. My husband hesitated for only a heartbeat before picking it up and signing with a decisive stroke. The applause began slowly, polite at first, then grew into something more genuine. People were smiling at me now, their earlier doubts dissolving under the weight of numbers and opportunity. Across the room, Sarah stood frozen, her glass untouched in her hand. She was watching the moment slip further and further beyond her control. Her phone buzzed and she glanced down. The color drained from her face. She clutched the device tighter, but her fingers trembled. Later, I'd hear whispers about what she saw, how the bank had frozen her accounts due to unpaid debts and defaulted loans. But in that instant, I only saw the way her mask cracked, the faint panic she couldn't hide. I didn't acknowledge her. Instead, I stepped toward the guests who had kept their distance earlier in the evening. "Mr. Chen," I said warmly, "I believe your firm has been looking for a partner in the digital sector. Let's talk." The shift was immediate. Influential guests rose from their seats to shake my hand, their attention turning from Sarah as if she were a shadow in the corner. My father-in-law himself extended his hand, his grip firm, his earlier skepticism replaced with a grudging respect. By the time the evening wound down, the story was already spreading. Photographers had captured the signing. Journalists were drafting headlines. Within hours, news feeds would carry images of me and my husband beside the words, "Rachel Carter seals, multi-million deal, secures family company's future." In the corners of the hall, Sarah tried to reinsert herself into conversations, but the pivot was too sharp. Guests nodded politely before excusing themselves, drifting toward me instead. Her voice, once sharp and commanding, was now background noise. James, the anchor who had helped me earlier, caught my eye from across the room and gave me a subtle nod. He knew as well as I did that the narrative was locked in now. As the last of the guests began to leave, I found myself standing by the grand piano near the entrance. The chandeliers cast warm light over the marble, and for the first time all night, I let my shoulders relax. My husband approached, slipping an arm around me. "You didn't just win tonight," he murmured. "You changed everything." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "Maybe," I said softly, "but change always comes with a cost." I glanced toward the far side of the room. Sarah stood alone by the double doors, her phone in hand, her eyes locked on me with something that wasn't quite defeat, but wasn't surrender either. The victory felt hollow in that moment. I had secured the company, cemented my place in the family's future, and dismantled her attack in full view of everyone. Yet the space between us was wider than ever, an unbridgeable gap carved by betrayal and pride. I knew then that there would be no reconciliation. Not tonight, maybe not ever. The headlines came first. Rachel Carter saves family legacy. Carter Media's landmark deal. From under fire to unstoppable. My face was everywhere, on glossy covers and sidebars on news sites, splashed across social media posts from people I hadn't spoken to in years. For 72 hours, it felt like victory. Calls poured in from potential partners, invitations to speak at conferences, even a discreet offer from a venture capital firm to buy Carter Media outright for a sum that would have made most people dizzy. But victory is loud, and loud things draw attention. By the end of the week, the tone began to shift. A few online articles popped up questioning the details of the joint venture. Anonymous sources suggested the numbers had been inflated, that I had pressured my husband into signing without full due diligence. A rival industry blog ran an exclusive, claiming Carter Media had a history of outsourcing work without disclosing it to clients. An echo of Sarah's original smear, now dressed up with charts and expert commentary. It didn't matter that none of it was true. The point was to plant doubt, and doubt is a weed that grows fast. Reporters began showing up outside my office, then my home. Photographers staked out the driveway. One morning, as I opened my front door to leave for a meeting, a camera flashed so close it left me momentarily blind. My inbox filled with requests for comment, each more intrusive than the last. And then there were the whispers. Friends grew cautious. Conversations clipped. People I'd known for years asked probing questions under the guise of concern. "Just making sure you're okay," they'd say, but their eyes were scanning for cracks. At night, I'd sit at my desk long after the house was quiet, scrolling through the coverage, mapping out the timing of each story, each accusation. The pattern was too precise to be coincidence. On the fifth night, an email arrived. No subject line, no signature, just one sentence. "Sarah hasn't lost yet." I stared at it, my pulse quickening. The address was a string of random letters and numbers, the kind you get when someone sets up an account to disappear as soon as they've sent their message. I forwarded it to my head of security, then sat back in my chair, considering. Sarah had been humiliated in front of the family, her reputation shredded. But humiliation isn't defeat, it's fuel. And if she had found a way to strike back, she wasn't working alone. 2 days later, I had my answer. It came in the form of a phone call from a contact in New York, a woman who had been in the industry long enough to recognize the fingerprints of a calculated media hit. "It's not Sarah you need to worry about," she said. "It's Wexler." The name hit like ice water. Jonathan Wexler, CEO of Wexler Media Group, one of the largest conglomerates in the business. He'd tried to buy Carter Media 3 years ago, and I'd turned him down. Not just turned him down, outbid him for a major client. He'd been polite in public, but in private, I knew he'd taken the loss personally. According to my contact, Wexler had been funneling resources to Sarah for months, helping her dig up dirt, amplifying her attacks, even crafting the fake dossier she'd flaunted at the anniversary party. Sarah had been the face of the assault, but Wexler had been the architect. It explained the precision of the rumors, the timing of the articles, the way the narrative shifted seamlessly from one accusation to the next. This wasn't petty family revenge anymore. This was a corporate siege. I spent the afternoon in my office with the blinds drawn, piecing together everything I knew about Wexler, his business interests, his political alliances, his weaknesses. Every empire has cracks. The trick is finding the one you can wedge open. By early evening, I had a plan forming. It wasn't complete yet, but it didn't need to be. The first step was to face him. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. A message, unknown number. Dinner, 8 o'clock, the Langford private room. No name, but it didn't need one. I stared at the screen for a long moment. The Langford was Wexler's favorite haunt, a place where deals were struck over aged whiskey and menus without prices. The invitation wasn't a courtesy, it was a summons. I could have ignored it. I could have sent an attorney or a proxy, but some conversations can't be delegated. At 7:45, I stepped into the back of the waiting town car. My driver glanced at me in the mirror, but I kept my gaze forward. The city lights blurred past, a smear of gold and red against the night. By the time we pulled up to the Langford, my mind was steady. This wasn't about intimidation. It wasn't even about revenge. This was about ending the game on my terms. The maitre d' led me through the main dining room, past tables of laughing patrons, and into a side hallway lined with frosted glass. At the end, a single door stood ajar. Through the gap, I saw him, Jonathan Wexler, seated alone at a table set for two. His suit was immaculate, his expression unreadable. Beside his glass of scotch lay a slim folder, the kind that could hold anything from a contract to a declaration of war. I stepped inside, the door clicking shut behind me. "Rachel," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I've been looking forward to this." Wexler rose slightly as I entered, extending a hand. I took it, feeling the faintest pressure in his grip, dominance disguised as courtesy. We sat, menus untouched. "I'll be direct," he began. "Your growth is impressive, but it's unsustainable. I can help you avoid the inevitable collapse." Translation: sell or be destroyed. I let him speak, every word calculated to sound like a lifeline while tightening the noose. He painted Sarah as a mere pawn, a mutual acquaintance who had overreached, but he didn't deny aiding her. In fact, he hinted at it, like a man proud of his craftsmanship. Under the table, my phone rested in my palm, the recording app running. The discreet mic sewn into my clutch was capturing every word. "You've built a good image," Wexler said, leaning back. "But image is fragile. I could have it gone by morning, or I could make it untouchable. It depends on you." I smiled as if tempted. "And what do you want in return?" His eyes glinted. "Majority control of Carter Media. Carter and Sons can stay in the picture for optics, but make no mistake, it would be mine." The arrogance was my opening. I nudged him toward more detail, asking how he'd managed the transition, what groundwork he'd already laid. He obliged, slipping into the rhythm of a man who loves to hear himself talk. When he described neutralizing key allies and starving Sarah until she learned obedience, I knew I had enough. We parted with the pretense of considering his offer. As soon as I was in the car, I sent the audio file to James at the network. Within 12 hours, the segment aired. "Media tycoon plots hostile takeover, admits orchestrating smear campaign." The fallout was instant. Wexler's largest client severed ties before noon. Stock in his company plunged. By evening, board members were calling for his resignation. And Sarah? The story outed her role in the campaign, and with Wexler's support gone, her financial backing dried up overnight. Creditors moved quickly. The accounts she'd fought to protect were frozen. Even family members who once defended her stopped returning her calls. For the first time in months, the pressure lifted. But the quiet didn't feel like peace. It felt like the moment after a storm, when the air is heavy and charged. Weeks later, Carter Media formally merged with Carter & Sons under a new umbrella, Carter Global. The board elected me CEO, a title that was more than symbolic. I now controlled both my company and the families, integrating their operations into a powerhouse the industry couldn't ignore. The launch gala was a spectacle. Press, investors, politicians. The chandeliers blazed, cameras flashed in relentless bursts, and every handshake felt like another thread in the web I'd spent years weaving. When the speeches ended, I stepped onto the balcony to breathe. The city stretched below, glittering like a living thing. The air was cool, sharp, alive with the hum of possibility. That's when I saw her. Sarah stood in the shadows near the far end of the balcony, just beyond the reach of the lights. She wasn't dressed for the gala. No sequins, no polished smile. Her arms were crossed, her expression unreadable. We held each other's gaze across the space. There was no shouting now, no audience to perform for, just a silence heavy with things unsaid. Finally, she turned and slipped back into the dark, leaving me with the image of her retreating form against the city lights. I didn't know if she'd given up the fight or if she was simply regrouping. Behind me, the press was waiting, their flashes ready to catch my next step. I straightened my shoulders, the weight of the moment settling into place. Peace, I thought, is just another word for the time you have to prepare.